In the year 1600, the Spanish Empire was swimming in treasure. It had more gold and silver than any empire in human history. Its flag flew over territories on every inhabited continent. An empire where the sun literally never set. Spanish galleons, loaded with unimaginable riches from the New World, sailed across the oceans. The kings of Spain weren't just powerful. They believed God himself had chosen them to rule the world. And yet, less than 2 centuries later, Spain was a shadow of its former self. It was bankrupt, militarily weak, and its vast empire was crumbling. This leads to a question that fascinates historians even today. How did the richest empire on earth collapse because of too much gold? How did a blessing of treasure become a devastating curse? Why did Spain's incredible wealth end up destroying the very foundations of its power? This isn't just a dusty old history lesson. It's a powerful warning about the dangers of easy money, the corrosion of greed, the destructive force of inflation, and the illusion of wealth. These are lessons that echo through the centuries and are just as relevant today. This is the story of the empire that was destroyed by its own riches. The story begins not in the grand palaces of Madrid, but deep in the mines of Potosí, in modern-day Bolivia. This was the source of Spain's wealth, a mountain literally made of silver. For over a century, a torrent of silver poured out of the Americas and into Spain. It seemed like an infinite source of money. The Spanish crown could now afford anything. Massive armies, grand cathedrals, and endless wars across Europe. But this flood of silver was a poison pill. With so much money pouring in, prices across Spain skyrocketed. This was one of history's first and most brutal episodes of hyperinflation. Bread, cloth, tools, everything became incredibly expensive for the average person. While the nobles and the crown were spending lavishly on foreign luxuries, Spanish farmers and artisans were driven out of business. Why make something in Spain when you could just import it for cheaper using all that silver? Spain's own industries withered and died. The country stopped producing and started consuming. It became a nation of aristocrats and officials, dependent on foreign goods and colonial silver. The easy money fueled endless, costly wars that drained the treasury faster than the treasure fleets could fill it. The kings borrowed heavily against future silver shipments, trapping the empire in a spiral of debt. What was once a vibrant, productive economy became a hollow shell, propped up only by a mountain of silver that was rapidly losing its value. So, when the silver from the Americas began to decline, the entire system collapsed. Spain was left with massive debts, a crippled economy, and a population mired in poverty. The very wealth that was meant to secure its power had rotted it from the inside out. The Spanish Empire's golden age ended not with a bang, but with the quiet decay of an economy that had forgotten how to create real value. It's a chilling reminder that true wealth isn't just about what you have, but what you can build. Imagine a country on the edge of the world, hungry, ambitious, and utterly desperate. This was Spain in 1492. For nearly 800 years, Christian kingdoms fought to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. This was the Reconquista, a centuries-long war that finally ended in the same year a certain sailor set off across the Atlantic. But victory didn't bring wealth. Spain was a shadow compared to its neighbors. France had fertile lands. Italy had bustling trade hubs. Spain, it had rocky soil, few natural resources, and a treasury that was practically empty. Its rulers, the famous duo Ferdinand and Isabella, were in a bind. They had unified a kingdom, but they had no money to run it. They needed a miracle, and they needed it fast. What Spain lacked in gold, it made up for with something far more powerful. A fierce, unwavering belief. They had just won a holy war, and in their minds, God rewarded those who conquered in his name. Gold wasn't just currency, it was seen as proof of divine favor. This powerful mix of religious zeal and sheer desperation created a national hunger for glory and riches. So, when a determined Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus came to them with a wild idea to sail west to reach the riches of the East, Dailies and other wealthier nations had turned him down. It was too risky, too outlandish. But for Spain, it was a gamble worth taking. They weren't just funding an exploration. They were betting on their own survival. They had no idea that Columbus wouldn't find a new route to Asia. Instead, he would stumble upon a new world, a continent teeming with resources beyond their wildest dreams. This accidental discovery born from poverty and fanaticism, would unleash a tidal wave of change across the globe. Spain would become the world's first global superpower, built on the gold and silver of the Americas. The world we know today was forged in the fire of that desperate ambition. History wasn't just written, it was violently reshaped by a nation that had everything to gain and nothing left to lose. When the first European ships landed in the Americas, the reaction was underwhelming. No spices, no silks, no grand cities like they'd heard about in China. The New World seemed like a bit of a letdown. But then, the whispers started. Rumors of gold glinting in riverbeds, tales of mountains made of pure silver, stories of vast empires overflowing with unimaginable treasure. Suddenly, everything changed. When Hernan Cortes marched on the Aztec capital, it wasn't just a conquest. When Francisco Pizarro captured the Inca emperor, it wasn't just about territory. What Spain had truly done was unlock the single greatest resource extraction operation the world had ever witnessed. It was a treasure hunt on a continental scale. They established legendary mines like Potosí in what is now Bolivia and Zacatecas in Mexico. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were industrial-scale operations. The sheer amount of silver they produced was staggering. Entire mountains, like the famous Cerro Rico at Potosí, were literally hollowed out from the inside. This silver boom came at a horrific human cost. Millions of indigenous people were forced into brutal labor in the mines, a system known as the meta. They were worked to death in hellish conditions, all to fuel Europe's growing appetite for silver. By the mid-1500s, an incredibly 80% of the entire world's silver supply was flowing from Spanish America. From the outside, it looked like Spain was drowning in treasure, the richest and most powerful empire on earth. But this flood of silver would have consequences no one could have predicted. It would reshape not just Spain's economy, but the economy of the entire globe, triggering inflation, wars, and social upheaval that would last for centuries. The story of this silver is the story of how our modern world was born, forged in the mines of the Americas. Thanks for watching. Have you ever wondered what you'd do with a sudden, massive fortune? Spain faced this exact question in the 16th century, and its answer led to the collapse of an empire. Picture this. Every year, enormous treasure fleets, the famous Spanish galleons, crossed the treacherous Atlantic. These ships weren't just carrying cargo. They were floating treasure chests, crammed with gold bars, glistening silver coins, rare jewels, and chests overflowing with emeralds from the New World. All of this wealth poured into one city, Seville. Almost overnight, Seville transformed from a regional port into the undisputed financial heart of Europe. Banks, merchants, and monarchs all looked to Spain, the richest and most powerful nation on earth. But this is where Spain made its first and most fatal mistake. The Spanish crown believed that wealth was gold. Real, shiny, physical gold and silver. They thought having more precious metals than anyone else automatically made them strong. So, what did they do with this unprecedented windfall? They didn't invest it. They didn't build a foundation for the future. There was little to no investment in manufacturing, technology, or infrastructure. Instead of creating a sustainable economy, they just spent and spent and spent. So, where did all that money go? The Spanish crown used its seemingly endless supply of gold to fund endless, costly wars across Europe. They hired expensive armies of mercenaries to fight their battles. And back home, they maintained a massive, lavish royal court. They consumed wealth at an astonishing rate. Spain became addicted to easy money. It was like winning the lottery every single year. The national mindset became dangerously simple. Why bother building factories when a shipload of silver just arrived for free? Why innovate or develop new technologies when conquering new lands pays so much better? This mentality, this belief that extracted wealth was better than created wealth, began to rot the empire from the inside out. While other European nations like England and the Netherlands were slowly building industries and trade networks, Spain was coasting on its colonial riches. They were consuming their future, one gold bar at a time. This short-sightedness would not just cost them their fortune, it would destroy everything they had built. It's a powerful lesson in history. True wealth isn't what you have. Ever wondered how a country overflowing with gold and silver could actually go broke? It sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened to Spain in the 16th and 17th centuries. This is a story of how a mountain of treasure led to Spain's downfall. After conquering vast territories in the Americas, Spain started shipping unbelievable amounts of gold and silver back home. Galleons filled with treasures sailed across the Atlantic, making the Spanish crown astonishingly wealthy. You'd think this would be the start of a golden age, a time of prosperity for everyone. But you'd be wrong. This is where Spain's real collapse began. Imagine this. Suddenly, there's way more money floating around. What happens? The value of that money goes down. It's like if everyone suddenly had $1 million, a loaf of bread wouldn't cost $1 anymore, would it? The same thing happened in Spain. As gold and silver flooded Europe, money became less valuable, and prices for everything exploded. Economists now call this phenomenon the price revolution. Let's look at the numbers, because they are staggering. Between the year 1500 and 1650, prices in Spain increased sixfold. That's a 600% increase. Think about your own bills, your rent, your groceries, your gas, and imagine them being 6 times higher. Now, here's the crucial part. While prices were skyrocketing, wages did not keep up. Not even close. So, what did this mean for the average person? It was a disaster. Ordinary people became poorer and poorer with each passing year. Farmers couldn't afford to buy seeds or tools, and the price they got for their crops couldn't cover their costs. Workers in the cities found their paychecks could buy less and less each week. The middle class, the backbone of any healthy economy, was completely wiped out. Spain had all the treasure in the world, but for the people living there, life became a daily struggle. Bread became a luxury. Rent skyrocketed, forcing families out of their homes. Poverty wasn't just a problem. Have you ever wondered what would happen if a country had all the money in the world, but didn't actually make anything? Well, let's take a trip back in time to the Spanish Empire. A real-life example of this exact scenario. It's a fascinating story about wealth, power, and a fatal economic flaw. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spain was swimming in silver and gold, plundered from the Americas. It was the richest, most powerful empire on the planet, with mountains of treasure arriving on fleets of galleons. You'd think they had it all figured out, but here's the twist. Instead of using that wealth to build up their own industries, they just went on a massive shopping spree. Why bother learning to make things when you can just buy them? That was the mindset. So, when they needed high-quality cloth, they bought it from England. When they needed advanced weapons, they called up Germany. Need a fleet of powerful ships? The Netherlands had them covered. Spain effectively outsourced its entire industrial base. It became a colossal middleman, a consumer empire, not a productive one. This created a massive, glittering, but very fragile economy. Everything depended on that steady flow of silver from the New World. But what happens when that flow is disrupted? Well, the Atlantic is a big, dangerous place. Vicious storms could swallow entire fleets. And let's not forget about the pirates and privateers, like Sir Francis Drake, who saw Spanish treasure ships as giant floating piggy banks, just waiting to be cracked open. Whenever the silver shipments were delayed, or even worse, captured, the entire Spanish economy would grind to a halt. It was like turning off the main water valve for a whole city. Suddenly, there was no money to pay for all those imported goods. Prices for everything would skyrocket overnight. Panic would sweep through the markets. The empire that looked so strong from the outside was actually incredibly vulnerable. They had all the cash, but they had no economic backbone. This is a powerful lesson from history. True, long-term strength for a nation doesn't just come from having money. It comes from the ability to create, to innovate, and to produce. Spain had immense wealth, but by neglecting its own industries, it planted the seeds of its own decline. It's a reminder that being a producer is often far more resilient than just. Have you ever wondered what happens when an empire that seems to have it all runs out of money? Let's talk about Spain during its golden age. They were swimming in gold and silver from the Americas, funding massive wars across the globe. They fought France, the Ottoman Empire, and England. They dealt with the Dutch revolt and conflicts with Protestant Europe. It was non-stop fighting, and gold paid for everything, until it didn't. Despite all that wealth, Spain declared bankruptcy not once, not twice, but 6 times between 1557 and 1666. Imagine that. Each time it happened, their creditors lost trust, and the interest rates on their loans skyrocketed. This created a vicious cycle, weakening the economy even further. The Spanish Empire was incredibly rich on paper, but in reality, it was permanently in debt. It's a powerful lesson in history about how even the greatest empires how a superpower can just collapse. Let's talk about Spain. In the 16th and 17th centuries, they were swimming in gold and silver from the Americas. It was like winning the lottery every single day. But this easy money turned out to be a curse. The Spanish nobility started to look down on actual work. Why get your hands dirty with trade or industry when you could just buy a fancy title? They valued status over productivity. Meanwhile, the Spanish Inquisition was busy stamping out any new ideas, scientific progress, or economic reforms. This created a massive brain drain. Talented people, innovators, and entrepreneurs simply packed up and left. So, while the rest of Europe was buzzing with the Renaissance and scientific revolution, Spain became rigid, proud, and stuck in the past. It's a powerful lesson. True wealth isn't about what you have, but what you create. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Being the richest empire in the world, only to end up paying for your rival's success. That's exactly what happened to Spain. For centuries, Spanish galleons, loaded with gold and silver from the Americas, ruled the seas. But by the 1700s, the tide had turned. Their mighty navy was a shadow of its former self, and their vast colonies became expensive burdens rather than cash cows. Meanwhile, their rivals, especially England, were getting smarter. They took that Spanish silver, not to build lavish palaces, but to build the future. They used it to fund new factories, create powerful banks, and ignite the Industrial Revolution. Essentially, Spain's treasure fueled everyone else's progress. When the gold and silver inevitably started to run out, Spain was left with nothing. They had financed the world's greatest economic boom, but were left behind. Ever wondered how an empire swimming in gold could just collapse? Let's talk about 16th century Spain. They discovered mountains of gold and silver in the Americas and thought they'd hit the jackpot forever. But here's the brutal truth they learned. Wealth without real productivity is just an illusion. All that gold flooded their economy, causing massive inflation. Prices for everything skyrocketed. Meanwhile, local industries like farming and textiles couldn't compete and withered away. Spain became a country that bought everything but made nothing. So, it wasn't the gold that destroyed them, it was their dependence on it. They forgot how to create genuine value. Empires don't fall because they're poor. They fall when they stop being productive. It's a powerful lesson that's just as relevant today for any country, company, or even individual. True wealth is about what you can create, not just what you have. Thanks for watching. And if you found this interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe.